Welcome to a journey through time, to a city built not just for people, but for gods. This is Thebes under Ramesses II around 1250 BC. At this moment, Egypt is one of the richest and most powerful civilizations on Earth, and Thebes is its beating religious heart. You wake up before sunrise, not in a palace, but in a small mud brick house on the west bank of the Nile. The air is still cool, the only time of day when the desert chooses mercy. You can hear the slap of the river against the boats, the distant bray of donkeys, the soft murmur of neighbors already stirring in the narrow lanes outside. Light seeps slowly through a reed mat door and a small opening in the wall. Inside, the room is simple, a low bed of woven reeds, a grinding stone for grain, a few clay jars of beer and water, a small clay oil lamp sputtering its last flame. There is no marble here, no gold, but there is life. A woman kneels over a grinding stone, crushing emmer wheat into flour. The smell of baking flatbread will be the first luxury of the day. When you step outside, the city is a dim silhouette against a sky just beginning to turn pink. To your left, the dark bulk of the cliffs that hide the tombs of kings. To your right, across the still black water of the Nile, the great temples of Karnak and Luxor are only outlines, but even in shadow they dominate everything. Thebes is waking up, and today you will walk it from doorstep to temple, from marketplace to tomb. The narrow alley outside your door is already alive. Children chase each other between mud brick walls, goats pick through last night's scraps, and neighbors greet each other with sleepy voices. Roofs are flat, used as extra rooms when the heat drives people upward at night. Above you, bundles of drying flax hang from wooden beams, waiting to be spun into linen. An Egyptian obsession that will wrap both peasants and pharaohs. You walk toward the river. As you reach the embankment, the sun finally breaks over the eastern horizon, turning the Nile into molten gold. Boats of every size crowd the water, small fishing skiffs, reed rafts loaded with vegetables, and larger cargo vessels heavy with grain, stone, and timber. Men haul on ropes, shouting to each other as they fight the current. The Nile is not just a river here, it is a moving road that ties the entire kingdom together. A makeshift market has already formed along the West Bank landing. Sellers spread their goods on mats, baskets of onions and garlic, freshly baked bread, dates so dark they're almost black, dried fish, clay lamps, and jars of thick, sweet beer. The air is a mixture of river mud, sweat, smoke, and spices. You pass a scribe seated cross-legged on a low stool, a wooden writing board on his lap, offering his services to those who cannot write. For a fee, he will turn your complaint, your contract, or your prayer into neat lines of hieratic script. But today, the city's attention is not on trade alone. Today, there will be a procession at Karnak, a festival in honor of Amun, king of the gods, whose main earthly residence lies just across the river. You join the stream of people moving toward the boats that will ferry them to the east bank. Families squeeze together in small skiffs, balancing jars and offerings as the boatman pushes off with a long pole. The current pulls you across, the temples growing larger with every moment. When you step onto the eastern shore, Thebes reveals its grandeur. Ahead lies an avenue lined with ram-headed sphinxes, stretching from the temple of Karnak toward the distant temple of Luxor. Their stone faces are calm, indifferent, each one guarding the path with a sculpted body that has already watched generations pass. Between them flows a river of people, priests in spotless white linen, officials with shaved heads and jewelry gleaming in the sun, and ordinary citizens like you, hoping to catch a glimpse of the divine. The closer you walk to Karnak, the smaller you feel. Its outer walls rise like a man-made cliff, covered in carved scenes of pharaohs smiting enemies and presenting tiny models of temples to the gods. Massive pylons, monumental gateways with sloping sides, tower above the crowd, their tops once painted in bright colors, now faded by centuries of sun. Tall flagpoles stand in front of them, each bearing a long-colored banner that snaps and ripples in the morning wind. You pass through the first pylon into a courtyard flooded with light. Columns march in rows on either side, lotus bud capitals reaching for the sky. In the distance, you can hear sistrums and drums, the metallic rattle and deep beats of a ritual orchestra. The smell of incense grows stronger with every step. frankincense from the mysterious land of Punt, myrrh and lesser herbs burning in bronze censers. Then you enter the great Hypostyle hall, a forest of stone. 134 columns rise around you, some so thick that it would take a dozen people holding hands to circle them. Their capitals bloom like giant papyrus and lotus flowers, painted in blues, reds and greens, colors still vivid in the half-light. Sunlight spears through the clerestory windows high above, slicing the dust-filled air into golden beams. You are inside a stone version of the Nile's marshes, an artificial sacred swamp where humans stand as small as insects beneath the ceiling. At the heart of the complex, priests perform the ritual that keeps the universe running. Behind closed doors, in the darkest sanctuary, the cult statue of Amun rests in a gilded shrine, seen only by the highest-ranking priests and the pharaoh himself. Today, Ramesses II will not be present in person, but his image is everywhere, carved dozens of times on every wall, presenting offerings, grasping enemies by the hair, standing heroic and impossibly young. The message is clear: Thebes belongs as much to Ramesses as it does to Amun. You follow the crowd as a sacred barque, a wooden boat covered in gold and inlaid with precious stones, is carried on the shoulders of priests through the temple. Its movement is slow and rhythmic, swaying with the chant of hymns. People stretch out their hands as it passes, not to touch it, that would be forbidden, but to feel the wind of its passing, to be as close as possible to the god it carries. For a moment, the massive stone hall feels alive and fluid, as if the Nile itself were flowing through its columns. Behind the temple, out of sight of the public rituals, another side of Thebes is hard at work. You step into a warren of workshops and courtyards where artisans shape the image of the pharaoh and the gods. Stonecutters chip away at blocks of sandstone and granite, their rhythmic hammering echoing off the walls. In one corner, sculptors smooth the features of a colossal statue of Ramesses, working carefully around the almond-shaped eyes and hooked nose that will make him recognizable for thousands of years. Nearby, painters crouch in front of limestone reliefs, filling carved outlines with color. Deep blue for hair, red and yellow for skin, green for plants, black for outlines and hieroglyphs. Their palettes are simple, but in their hands, the walls become vivid narratives, endless comics of conquest, offerings, and divine approval. In a shady corner, scribes bend over papyrus scrolls, copying hymns, tax records, and love poems in neat rows, each stroke of the reed pen another stitch in the fabric of the kingdom. All of this, the temples, the processions, the images, is not just devotion, it is propaganda in stone and pigment. It tells every Egyptian a simple story. The world is ordered, the gods are pleased, and Ramesses will keep it that way. By midday, the heat becomes a physical force. The stone of Karnak radiates warmth like the side of a kiln. You retreat toward the river, passing through the mouth of the avenue of sphinxes. Some people head home to rest in the shade. But your journey is not finished. You cross the Nile again, this time heading toward the cliffs that loom behind the West Bank villages, toward the place where kings go to outlast death. The climb into the desert is steep, the ground shifting under your sandals. With every step, the green strip of the Nile Valley shrinks behind you until it looks like a painted ribbon between two infinities of sand. Ahead, nestled in a hidden valley, is the necropolis now called the Valley of the Kings. From a distance, the entrances to the tombs look like nothing more than dark cuts in the rock, easy to miss if you didn't know where to look. Workers are still at labor on some of these tombs. Teams of men chip away at limestone walls deep underground, carving corridors and chambers that twist into the mountain. The air inside is hot and still, filled with the dust of centuries. By the light of oil lamps, artists cover the newly smoothed surfaces with scenes of the afterlife. The pharaoh sailing with the sun god through the 12 hours of the night, facing monsters and judgment, passing through gates guarded by cobras and human-headed deities. Color here is not decoration, it is technology. The right spells in the right hues, painted in the right order, will give the king the roadmap he needs to be reborn with the rising sun. The tomb is a machine for eternity, and every worker in it is a tiny anonymous gear. Outside in the blinding desert sun, you look back toward the valley. Thebes is a city obsessed with continuity. On the east bank, temples and palaces celebrate the pharaoh's life and power. On the west, these silent tombs prepare for his death and transformation. Between them flows the Nile, carrying boats, grain, priests, and gossip. It is all one system: religious, political, economic. As the day wanes, you descend again toward the river. The heat softens, shadows lengthen. For your final walk, you follow the processional route south along the east bank to the Temple of Luxor. Where Karnak is vast and overwhelming, Luxor is more intimate and theatrical, a stage built for evening. By the time you arrive, the sky has turned purple. Torches burn in tall metal stands, their flames beating against the darkening air. The massive first pylon of Luxor rises ahead, flanked by colossal seated statues of Ramesses II himself, each one several times taller than a man. Once, a pair of obelisks stood here. Now only one remains, its tip catching the last red light of the sun. You pass between the statues into a courtyard alive with sound. Musicians play drums and flutes, their rhythms echoing between columns. Dancers move in circles, linen skirts swirling, jewelry flashing in the firelight. Incense burns in bronze braziers, smoke coiling upward where stars are beginning to appear. The temple walls, covered in reliefs, seem to flicker as if the figures upon them were moving. You walk slowly down the central axis of the temple, through colonnades that draw your eyes toward a sanctuary now closed for the night. The farther you go in, the darker and more sacred the space feels. For the Egyptians, this is the point where the human city and the divine world meet, a hinge between what is seen and what is unseen. You are walking along the spine of a blueprint designed to align stone, star, and ceremony. Then, suddenly, the spell breaks, not in the past, but in the present. The torches vanish, the music fades, the people disappear. You find yourself standing in modern Luxor, under electric lights, surrounded by broken columns and reconstructed fragments. Cars pass in the distance. Tourists in shorts and t-shirts take photos with their phones. The colossal statues of Ramesses are still here, but their noses are broken, their colors mostly gone. Karnak is half ruin, half open-air museum. The Valley of the Kings is a managed archaeological site with wooden walkways and numbered tombs. 3,000 years have passed. Thebes is gone, and yet it isn't. The stones remain. The gods are silent, but their names are still spoken by strangers from far away. Ramesses' face, carved into rock hundreds of times, still stares across the sand. Walking through Thebes under Ramesses II reminds us of two things. First, of what people can build when they bend an entire landscape to their will. Temples aligned with stars, cities organized around rivers, machines for eternity carved into mountains. And second, of how even the mightiest city becomes a memory, a ruin, a set of broken lines in a history book. If this journey through ancient Egypt moved you, leave a comment and tell us. Which lost world should we walk through next? Another city on the Nile, the streets of Babylon, or the walls of Constantinople before they fall? Subscribe to History in Motion to keep the ancient world alive. One walk, one city, one vanished civilization at a time.